Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast, episode 310. I am your host and Ohio pharmacist, Kim Newlove. My guest today is Dr. Zain Syed, host of Digital Thoughts Podcast. Links to Zain's podcast, his LinkedIn profile, and more are in the show notes on thepharmacistvoice.com. This is the 9th episode in my Pharmacist Podcasters Series. If you are new to this series, welcome. My guests and I talk about podcasting to inspire you to start your own podcast, be a podcast guest, or use your voice in general. If you are interested in podcasting, podguesting, or public speaking, you will like this episode. By the way, if you need help starting a podcast, I can help. I know what it's like to be at the beginning of that process and not know the first step. But I have also started 2 podcasts, so I do know what I'm doing, and I can help you start yours too. Check out my free ebook and audiobook about podcasting, or buy my self-paced online course or book time one-on-one with me. I absolutely love podcasting, and I would love to help you start your podcast in 2025 too. Head over to kimnewlove.com/podcasting to access those resources. Next up, I'll tell you a little more about my guest, and then I'll roll the interview. Zain Syed is a product manager at Cencora, leading the development of clinical analytics products for healthcare providers. Drawing from nearly a decade of experience as an oncology pharmacist in outpatient clinics and infusion centers, he brings deep clinical expertise to digital healthcare solutions. Through his newsletter and his podcast, which is called Digital Thoughts, Zain explores the dynamic intersection of healthcare and technology, sharing insights on how innovation is reshaping patient care. His unique background bridges the gap between clinical practice and technological advancement. That ends Zain's introduction. Now, get ready to hear about how Zain got interested in digital health, why he started his podcast, what he and his guests talk about, why he prefers the interview format, audience takeaways, what Zain gets out of podcasting, how to find his podcast and his newsletter, advice for new podcasters, and advice for new dad podcasters. Zain has a 1-year-old. Without further ado, here's my conversation with Dr. Zain Syed. Hi, Zain. Welcome to the Pharmacist Voice Podcast. How are you?
Hey, Cam. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited for this.
Awesome. It's always good to talk to another podcaster. Welcome to the Pharmacist Podcasters Series.
No, thank you very much. You had mentioned this a couple of months ago, and I was excited back then, and I'm glad we could make this work out.
Awesome. Your area of expertise on your podcast is very different from mine. What do you talk about on Digital Thoughts Podcast? I've listened to it a couple of times, but I'd love to hear it from you.
So the goal of it is to dive into digital health topics, like digital tech topics. And then what my idea behind it was that if you were starting a startup or were interested in it, you could listen to the podcast and kind of get a 360-degree view of digital health. So I've had people from founders, clinicians, all the way to like marketing and salespeople. So, I touch on like, how do you get your first customers to all the way to, the clinician side where, what are they really looking for? Like, what is burnout? Like, what does that even mean? Because, that term gets thrown around a lot. I mean, I guess my niche is digital health. It's a pretty wide niche, but that's what I talk about. I try to give a 360-degree view of health tech.
Got it. When I think of digital health, a lot of times I think of those continuous glucose monitors or some sort of wearable. Is it that type of digital health too?
I've had topics on like devices and stuff like that. Primarily, most of the people that I've had on have been more like on the software side. Like to answer your question, yes, that is also digital health. But yeah, the people I primarily talk to is on the software side for a couple of reasons, mainly because devices in general, I don't know if this is what you wanted me to answer with, but devices in general are a lot harder and require a lot more capital to get off the ground. I shouldn't say they're harder, but there's a lot of R&D that goes into it and a lot of capital that is necessary to kind of just get off the ground versus a software. I mean, in healthcare, nothing is easy. Let's put that out there. But software, generally speaking, you can spin it up a little quicker than a device per se. And most devices need FDA approval, right, to be considered a medical device. So there's a lot longer runway you're going to need versus software right now. It's interesting, the conversations that are being had. I think there's some, where the FDA is trying to figure out like, hey, how do we do software as a medical device? There's already stuff out there for that. There's some companies that are applying for it and have successfully applied to it. But right now it's, I don't, for lack of a better word, it's kind of like the wild, wild west. Like people are trying to figure out where they can fit in, and we can kind of go into it, interoperability, all that stuff. It's there's a lot to figure out, but there's a lot of amazing people in this space, and every time I talk to them, it kind of rejuvenates you a little bit to find out that what kind of people are actually trying to tackle these issues.
I would love to talk a little bit more about interoperability, but first I wanted to clarify what I was talking about. It seems like digital health is pharmacists using these, digital health products, these wearables, in order to get health information so they can make more informed choices about drug therapy and, maybe food intake, things like that. Just so you know, that's where I was headed with that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think from the pharmacist angle, I mean, yeah, there's a lot to that, right? Like there's, I think with healthcare, the one thing I mean, as a pharmacist is how much information do you need and how much is too much information? Because there's also a lot of noise as well. One thing that, like specifically with continuous glucose monitoring and like, blood, home blood pressures and stuff, I really like those things. I mean, I remember having a conversation with somebody about how accurate they are and all that stuff, like within that. And I told him, like, from a clinician view, yes, accuracy is 100% necessary. But what we're really looking for are trends, right? Like, is your glucose really high in the morning all of a sudden? Or is it dropping in the middle of the day? Or, man, your glucose really spiked here and here. Like, did you eat something? I mean, the trends are what we're mostly looking for, knowing that not everything is going to be exact. But yeah, to answer your question, I mean, I think there's a lot of information out there. Now, I think we're at the point where, like, yes, we're gathering the information, but now what do we do with it? And I think that's the question that's being answered and asked at the same time.
Good points. Yes, I see a lot of conferences kind of tackling these digital health topics. But on your podcast, that type of digital health is not really the focus, right?
No, I mean, honestly, I don't know if I'm like the greatest content creator of all time or anything like that. My content philosophy has always been, I just want to talk to cool people that are doing cool things. And I've had people reach out. I mean, I've reached out to people and they say like, hey, do you think your audience will really like this? And I flat out tell them, like, not that I don't care. I'm like, you know what? I think it's going to be interesting. I am the persona that I'm going after. So and a lot of my audience is like me, right? Like they're interested in the topic. I have, there's people that are on the clinical side that want to know what's coming, what new things are coming out there, what's out there. There's people on the founder side looking to find their first customers and all that stuff. And also they're looking for the clinician point of view, like, because, so yeah, I don't know. Like I said, I use myself. It's a term called dog fooding in the product world, where you create a product and you create a product for yourself to solve your own problem, and you just kind of use it. And that way so that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm just like, my content is just dog fooding, like something that I'm really interested in, people I really want to talk to. That's who I usually get on. But yeah, but they're usually the only stipulation I have is you're in digital health or a clinician in healthcare.
Got it. Now, I understand that you're an oncology pharmacist by training, right? So how'd you get into this?
So it's an interesting story. So it was back in 2019. I was the main preceptor for our rotation at our site. I had a student, he was like, man, your job is really awesome, Zan. Like, I mean, it was. I really I want to say this. I really liked my job, really loved doing what I was doing, all that stuff, right? It was amazing. I was, quote unquote, at the peak of my profession. So we were having a conversation about like what he wants to do when he graduates and all that stuff. And he was kind of telling me, I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. And I was kind of giving him advice. And he's like, I would love to have a job like yours. It's really awesome. You work you work day shift, no weekends. At the time, one holiday a year, which is insane for a hospital, right? And he's like, your subject matter, oncology is awesome, right? Like, the patients you deal with, it's great. And he's like, I could see myself doing this. I mean, and then he turned to me, and it was a question that no one has ever asked me, or me to myself. And he asked me, Zain, do you think you can see yourself doing this for the rest of your life, like your career? And I had never thought about that. Like at that time, I was just like, trying to just figure out what this person needed. Like I'd never sat down and actually thought like, hey, is this where I want to be for the rest of my career? And I didn't say anything for what it seemed like minutes, but it was probably like 5 seconds. And I said no. And like, and his jaw dropped to the floor. My jaw dropped to the floor because I didn't know why I said no, but I just knew that no was the right answer. And then I kind of went into this like existential crisis where I was like, what am I doing with my life? Like I spent, all my 30s trying to get to this point, getting to this where I wanted to be. And why did I say no? And I had no idea why. So I sat there with my wife and had to do a lot of soul searching as to what was going on with me. I went back and was thinking about, hey, when was I the happiest in my career? Maybe let's go back to that and, see if that's where what I wanted to do. And one thing I didn't mention was in the first couple of years, like I think it was the second year when I became into my career, I had my own digital health startup. And we never left the pre-seed round, but we worked on it for 3 years, and I really loved doing it. I did that part-time while I was a full-time pharmacist. The reason why I'm saying this is when I was thinking back as when I was the happiest, everything was pointing me back to those experiences where I was working on this product, where I was trying to solve the world's problems. Another clinician with a God complex, I know, guys. But yeah, that's what everything was pointing back to. And I was like, wait, there's something to this. So then I was like, okay, let's see if I want to go into digital health. So that started my like 3.5 year journey into making my transition into digital health. So now I'm a product manager at Cencora. So that's what started it.
What is your daily job there at Cencora?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think one of the reasons why I like being a product manager is there's no one day is the same. I think that for people that have worked in like inpatient hospital setting or even retail, honestly, it's kind of like controlled chaos. Like things are going haywire all around you. It's like a tornado and you're just kind of sitting in the middle of it and you're just trying to fit the pieces and make sure just putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Weirdly, and I'm not trying to say this as like, we want everyone to be healthy, but weirdly that is like a feeling that I've always missed. And kind of product kind of gives me that. So what product management is, you're basically, this is, depending on who you talk to, like you're kind of the CEO of your product. Basically, what you're doing is you're trying to get all these different stakeholders, like the engineering team, the design team, the higher ups, right? Like your management, your own team to buy into this vision of a product. And you are creating the vision, you're creating like kind of the business side of it, why you're doing what you're doing, and what you need to do. And one thing that I tell people as a pharmacist, and I think pharmacists make great product managers for this reason, is as a product manager, I have no authority over anyone. And what I mean by that is no one reports to me. But I have to get all of these different team members to agree to my vision and do what I tell them to do. Right. And that's kind of very similar to a pharmacist. Like we're kind of the last chain. We're like the last thing in the chain and no one has to listen to us. Right. Like, I guess we have to verify it, but we have to convince people as to why, if there needs to be a change in the medication or something, like we need to tell them why this is. And usually when I had to do that, I usually used to have a backup plan, like an A, B, or C type thing. And the same thing with product, right? Like I don't have any authority over anyone. I have to sell them my vision. I have to tell them why I'm doing it and have to get everyone to buy in, right? Like today I had meetings with a bunch of different teams, right? I had meetings with engineers. The day before I had meetings with designers. So it's all over the place, which I love.
It sounds creative and messy. I like it.
Yeah, no, it is. It is very creative and very messy. Yes.
Yeah, nothing wrong with that. So what led you to podcasting?
I've always liked the medium, mainly because I had an hour-long drive to work. I was kind of sick of sports talk and this music was staying. So I started listening to some podcasts. And actually Digital Thoughts is not my first podcast. My first podcast was about, I love like cars, right? So I had started, I forgot what the podcast was called. It's like, I forgot. It was like a 5-minute podcast from like NPR. They worked for that. I can't think of it right now. 100% invisible or something like that. But it was like a small snippet. They would take like a really large topic. They would distill it in like 5 to 10 minutes, and then you can kind of move on with your life. And I really liked that format. So what I would do is I would take car topics and just be like, okay, I only have 5 minutes to talk about it. And I would take like all that information, distill it down to 5 minutes. I think I had like 8 episodes. I really liked it. If anyone's interested, it's called Beyond Four Wheels. I think it's still out there. You can still find it. But I would actually like to bring that back up again. I just don't have time. But yeah, that's how it started. And then I left that because it was a lot of work. I had to do a lot of research and then write the script and do all that. So then I was like, man, I wanted to start a podcast. And I was like, I don't want to be the only person talking. I wanted kind of the guest to kind of drive the conversation. So yeah, my podcast, the Digital Thoughts podcast, started once I started my newsletter. Somebody had reached out to me saying, hey, we really like what you wrote. They wanted to do something like wanted me to write something. And I'm like, hey, I want to keep my newsletter kind of just my voice and just random things, right? What I think about what's going on, but I would love to have you on as a guest on my podcast. And I thought they were going to say no, but they said yes. And that's kind of how it started. And then I just started reaching out to everyone I knew that'd be interesting. And surprisingly, they all said yes. So that's how it started.
That is very cool. I did not know about your other podcast. And I met some guy that owns a Ford GT. I've actually got his little postcard with me here. And I thought that was a pretty slick car. I'm not really into cars, but I do like car shows. I like motorcycles better. I know that's kind of weird for a girl, but I just love them. I know what it's like to be a motorhead, man.
Yeah, no, Ford GTs are pretty sweet.
Yes, this guy is like 80 years old. I'm showing a picture of Michael Murray. He wrote a book that I read, which was actually called Biker Tales of all things, even though he's a former sports car driver.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, also a motorcyclist. So I think you and I would both like the guy. He wrote a book that's got a bunch of bite-sized stories about lessons learned from his life. Yeah.
That's awesome.
But anyways, you're now sharing lessons from your life and other people's lives on your podcast, Digital Thoughts. I was just kind of curious about the timing. You talked about going from being an oncology pharmacist in a hospital to then being this product manager, right? So what was the timing of the second podcast, Digital Thoughts?
Yeah, so during my 3.5-year journey into figuring out what I want to do with my life, and making that transition, I did a lot of networking. And when I mean a lot of networking, I mean a lot of networking, probably like 4 to 5 calls a week at least. And then this is coming from somebody who hated networking and never wanted to talk to anyone. So if I can do it, guys, you can do it too. But yeah, no, I wouldn't go to the extreme that I did, but definitely networking. That's one thing if you get one thing out of it, network. But no, I talked to a lot of people, and in the beginning I talked to somebody and he was like, hey, Zain, obviously you know what you're talking about. I think you can definitely do the job, but he was like, I'm going to be completely honest with you. When your resume crosses somebody's desk like that, they're going to just see a pharmacist and they're not going to be able to see what's in your brain. How do you get that out? How do you do that? He's like, well, I mean, he was kind of, I'm having a conversation, but he was like, what you need to do is you need to put yourself out there, find a niche and start talking about it. Use whatever place you want. Like, I chose LinkedIn, but he's like, whatever social media thing you want, whatever you want to do, but you need to put yourself out there. And that is hella scary for me. It still is. Honestly, I've taken a break from social media right now, mainly because it's been so busy with everything. But yeah, that's what it started. And I remember like my first couple of posts, I still to this day, I'm like, oh, do I really want to post this? Does anyone care? Whatever. In reality, no one really cares, guys. Just put it out there. Just as long as you're not like attacking somebody and it's your own thoughts, it'll be fine. But yeah, no, that's how it started. So I started doing that for a couple of months, and surprisingly, I was like, okay, my thoughts are actually resonating with people. A, B, I started connecting with a lot of interesting people that either thought the same way as me, or they didn't agree with me, but I still wanted to talk to, and we had great conversations, right? And I was like, oh, this is awesome. But like on a LinkedIn post, like healthcare is very nuanced. If I know, surprise, guys. So you need a little bit more words, right? And I found myself enjoying writing. So I was like, oh, let me just start a newsletter. honestly, my life is a lot of like weird and not weird and like crazy encounters at maybe the right time. So this was when Amazon had bought One Medical, I think, right? And I put up a post about what Amazon is like, what's Amazon's doing, kind of like talking about this. And I had like 3 people reach out to me about that post, and it's like, oh man, this is great. Like one person wanted to write an article on it. I'm like, that's fine, I don't care. But one person who had had a newsletter reached out to me. He's like, hey, have you thought about writing a newsletter? This would be. I'm like, oh yeah, I have, but I don't really know what to do. He's like, just make this your first newsletter post. So he had reached out to me, and I wanted to set up a call with him, right? And I was like, hey, let me just pick your brain about newsletters. He's like, just start a Substack and just copy and paste that Amazon post as your first newsletter. He's like, just get it out there, and once it's out there, you'll just find your own rhythm and zone. And that's kind of how it started. And then I just kind of started talking about random stuff, and yeah, I still really enjoy writing. I just haven't done it in a while, but I found I was really enjoying it, and it was just nice to it was a little cathartic for me because I was talking about things that were frustrating me during my clinical career, and so the way I structured my newsletter, I never wanted to be like the person like, hey, this is the problem, water is wet, like I wanted to be like, okay, this is the problem, and this is how I would solve it, right? Like with my limited knowledge and what I know what's out there, this is how I would maybe tackle the situation. And if you disagree with me, I'm okay with people disagreeing with me, but tell me why you disagree with me. Let's have a conversation about it. Don't be like, oh, this is stupid, and just like leave the chat. Like that doesn't help anyone. But yeah, so I found that like fun and cathartic for me because I was like, man, I dealt with this all the time, and if we just had this would have helped a lot. And yeah, so it kind of resonated with people, and yeah, so that's where that started.
All right. I'm trying to form a timeline in my head here. You were an oncology pharmacist. Then you went on this journey to find yourself again. You started writing. The podcast came first, then the product management came along last, right?
Yeah, 2019. If you want to put like dates to it, 2019, like mid 2019. I think it was in the summer. I had my holy crap, what am I doing with my life moment with my student. And then probably like around September or something, I started writing. And then I think November is when I started the newsletter. And then the podcast started, I think like 3 or 4 months later. So like January, I think January was the first episode released. And that was like in the first year. Then it was another like 2 years after that till I became a product manager. This whole time I was still working as an oncology pharmacist. So I became product manager. What year is it right now? So January of 23. Yeah.
That's what your LinkedIn profile says.
Yeah. So there you go.
There you go. I like timelines. I think it's just the pharmacist in me where everything has to be logical.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it helps other people who are thinking about starting a podcast too to understand that sometimes you start with a feeling like, is this really where I want to be in my life? And then you start writing about it, clarifying things in your head. And then next thing you know, people are telling you, I would love to be on a podcast with you. And you're getting guests, you're having conversations, you're publishing a podcast, then you're getting a job that's not a pharmacy job. There's, it's kind of interesting how things kind of develop. And so, anyways, it's inspiration for my audience. Thank you.
Well, hopefully, if I can inspire one person, well, hopefully I do. So, kind of going back to the networking thing, I think at worst, if you start a podcast, it's a great way to network with people. Because I will tell you this, I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but I've talked to some like real amazing individuals, and you'll start seeing a very similar thread between all of them. And it really helps you get into the mind of somebody, right? Like my podcasts are like 45 minutes to an hour. To get 45 minutes to an hour with somebody's just sole attention is crazy, right? And a podcast, I think podcasting is a great way of kind of opening that door and getting them in the room. Obviously be respectful and, follow through with it, right? Post the episode and all that stuff. But I found, that wasn't the reason why I started, but it has helped me quite a bit in just so many things in my life.
I like the comment about it opening doors, and kind of what you're getting at is you get access to people that you ordinarily wouldn't have free access to. You don't have to pay for their time when they're on your podcast. I've never paid anybody to be on my podcast. Have you?
Nope. No,
Yeah,
I just
see,
usually
it's
just
free
cold,
access.
cold DMs to people. Yeah, I mean, I've had some really, I even had the CMO of WebMD on, and that was just a complete, for people, just cold DM, and he messaged me back. He's like, email me here. I emailed him, not thinking that he would email me back. And next thing you know, we scheduled a call. That was great. And awesome guy, really nice person. And that really only happened. The only reason I reached out to him was because I had a podcast, and I was like, hey, he would be an interesting guy. Let me just shoot my shot and see what happens. So yeah.
Yeah, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
might as well take the shot. I respect that.
Yeah.
Do you have a white whale? Meaning, is there somebody out there that you think is out of your reach, but yet you would love to interview them? Who's your white whale?
I don't think I have a white whale per se. I think for me, I really like finding people that are not super, I shouldn't say super popular, but what I found is, yes, you have your thought leaders and all that stuff out there, right? Quote unquote, your influencers out there. But there's a lot of knowledge out there from people that are not that. And I think that's what I enjoy, is finding those really interesting people. I've had people reach out to me how do you find all these cool guests and stuff? And I'm like, I just talk to people, right? I'll set up a call, and if we're vibing and they have something awesome to say and I can learn from them, they're a guest, right? I don't go out and kind of think. I'm sure if I don't know, if somebody really famous reached out to me, it'd be cool. But yeah,
Mark
I don't really.
Cuban.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to talk to Mark Cuban. But yeah, that's my philosophy with podcasts. With my finding my guests is I'm trying to find just really interesting people that either have a really interesting story or have interesting thoughts. Because I think that if we, and this is a word that's used a lot, so maybe I'm going to cringe while saying it, but democratizing just kind of thoughts, right? I think if we have just the top of the hill, just regurgitating the same thing over and over again, we're going to miss a lot of the conversation. And I think that if we don't go and talk to people on the ground and get different perspectives, you're not going to get the full story. And I think that's one thing that I try to do is I don't want to hear the cookie cutter same answer. And I tell people I'm okay with you disagreeing with me. I actually would like that a lot. If you have a viewpoint that you and I may not agree on, but if we can talk through it, that's interesting to me.
I appreciate those thoughts. Hey, can I ask you? I know that I've seen you've done quite a few interviews. Have you ever done a solo show where it's just you talking?
No, I have not. No.
Why not?
I think I don't know if I'm entertaining enough, to be honest. I'm just gonna be serious. I'm just gonna be honest. I think everyone has their own strengths. I think some people are really good talking and getting their ideas out there. I'm a person that likes to bounce ideas off of people and just have a conversation. I can come up with ideas and all that stuff on my own, but to me that's a little boring. I feel like I'm just, talking to myself. I think for me, there's that awesome moment in a conversation where both sides are coming together. They might disagree, but they're kind of coming together, and you start figuring things out. And that to me is really awesome. And that's what I like to do. And I honestly just like to have conversations. Even in my podcast, I tell people hey, I don't even have questions that I ask them. I'm like, hey, we're going to just talk about this and maybe this, and then we'll just kind of take the conversation where it goes. And I just try to keep it free flowing. But the reason why I don't do a solo show is maybe I should try it, but I don't know what I would talk about, and I don't think I would be that entertaining by myself.
Zan, it's totally fine. I love that you're giving the reasons, the heartfelt reasons that you don't innately just go ahead and do the solo shows. But somebody listening to this who may be thinking about starting a podcast is probably trying to decide, all right, do I want a solo show, an interview show, a panel discussion? Am I going to be doing editorials on articles? Or, there's so many different formats. How did you land on the interview one? It sounds like that's your strength. That's what you like. But is there any other reason?
Yeah, so I said one of my first podcasts was me by myself, right? So I had to write a script. It was a lot of research and everything involved. Not saying that I don't research now, but I think that kind of guided me into the interview style. Because one thing is, when you're doing a solo thing, you are it, right? You have to do all the research. You have to, and you might not be a subject matter expert in that thing, so it's going to take you a little longer, right? And I'm not saying that should be a barrier if that's what you like to do. I mean, I love researching, right? It's just a matter of time. That's why I kind of stayed straight away from like the individual thing, because I was like, the pre-production is going to be really long, right? I mean, for pre-production, I mean like before you hit record, like you have to do a lot, get your ducks in a row, all that stuff. I mean, there's ways to do it. I think, I mean, now that as I'm getting more like, like if you're doing like a news show, like you could read news articles and then give your thoughts on it. I think that is something, if you want to do like something quick and say quick and dirty, but like something quick, right? Where it's like a opinion based type thing. And for me, the reason why I chose interviews was because I didn't want to be the content. I didn't want to be the focus of the content. I wanted to bring to light cool and interesting individuals and their stories. And not trying to like toot my own horn, I think that one of my skills is I'm a good listener, and I don't like to talk a lot, even though right now it sounds like I do like to talk a lot. But I generally don't like to talk too much. I just like to listen and distill that information. And the interview style kind of gives me that opportunity to do that and just listen and let the individual kind of just talk. And the other thing is I don't have to do a lot of pre-production in that. It's mostly all post production, and so that's why I chose that. In terms of panel discussions, I think they can be really good. One thing about panels is, so there's a couple of different types of panels, and maybe you can chime in on this as well. One is like you have a panel of, you have either rotating people that and they're consistently going, and you can build a good rapport with them, and they might switch out here and there, but generally speaking, you guys kind of have an idea of when you stop talking, when to start, all this stuff, right? You can play off each other. With like general panels, you have to be a good moderator, and you almost have to not direct the conversation in like a nefarious way, but like, if people are getting off topic or whatever, because you have other people also involved in it, right? Like you can't just have one person monopolize the whole conversation. So it requires a certain type of personality, which I don't know if I have. I mean, I'd love to try to do a panel, maybe as a panel guest, maybe not as the moderator of the panel discussion. But that's that. I think for me, that's what the hardest thing about having a panel style thing is getting to a point where one person is not monopolizing the whole conversation, because everyone is giving up the same amount of time, right? It's not just that one person. So
setting ground rules could be really important with a panel discussion. I've only done it a few times.
Yeah. So what kind of ground rules do you set?
I have been a little bossy, to be honest. And for example, I can't remember the episode number. It was a drug take back day theme. I had 3 different guests, and they were from the Ohio State University. So they all worked together. And so they were kind of a team, really. And I would ask a question, and one of them would answer it first, and then the others would add something if needed. But the bossy part was when I said, hey, I would like you guys to say your name. Like, hey, this is Ruth. They would just say who they were, because this is audio. People can't see them. And if they think their voices sound similar enough, they're not going to notice that there's 2 different people talking, and that could be a little bit off-putting to the listener. So anyways, that's the bossy part. I made sure to let them know I had an agenda. I had whatever number of questions it was. I had this much time. They had a certain amount of time, and I wanted my audience to understand who was talking, because they weren't all pharmacists.
Yeah, I mean, like, see, those are things that I don't even think about, right? So I kind of go, but I think the biggest thing is don't overthink it. If you want to start one, don't overthink it and just start. You can always change it. If you start in a solo and go to interview style, honestly, no one's going to care. If you go from interview to panel and back, and do all of them, right? Do all 3 of them.
I've done them all too.
Yeah, and don't worry about finding a niche, right? Like, I mean, the niche will form for you. Like, just be like, hey, I'm interested in X. And then the more you dive into X, you'll start seeing like, oh, you know what? It's this part of this subject matter I really like, and you can just kind of dive into that. I think the only reason I'm saying this is because I fell into this too as well. Like, oh man, I got to niche down. Yes, it is good to niche down, 100%. No one's going to say not to niche down. Don't look for your niche to procrastinate on starting something. Just start the niche. You will find the niche. And honestly, in the beginning, you're going to be learning so much that you don't want to like get all of your heavy hitters in the beginning anyways, right? I'm not saying that it's like, but like it's good to like just explore and experiment and just be okay with it. I think all of us will go back and listen to our first couple of ones and kind of be like, oh, that was bad. So everyone has that. So just get it out early.
Thank you for saying that. I just did episode 300 for the Pharmacist Voice podcast.
Wow.
And I went back to episode 1 and I played a little clip from it. And I'm like, that made me cringe.
Yeah.
But just like your day job, though, it's creative and it's a little bit messy. And that's what podcasting is. Now, how'd you decide if you were going to do audio or video?
So I actually record audio and video. The goal was to put it up on YouTube. I think I got one podcast up on YouTube. I still keep the video because I still want to do it. But right now it's audio only. Like I said, I have the video. I have hundreds of gigs of video. I should probably put it up there. I always tell my guests I'm recording video. So right now mine is audio.
Yeah, so it sounds like you had the intention to do both, but then you realized that really it is twice as much editing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We only have so much time.
Yeah, I think there is something to video podcasts. I consume a lot of content on YouTube, even some podcasts. And I think there is something to the video format where you feel like you're in the room with them, right? Like you feel like you can get to know the person on the other end because there's not a lot going on, right? Like there's not like jump cuts all over the place, whatever. But I think like video can add to that as well. Like I think when you see somebody and you mix it with that intimacy of a podcasting setting, that can help quite a bit. That's why I wanted to start it. Not so people know me, but I think that if you can put a face to a name, you're more likely to, I don't know. And also YouTube is, I think, the second largest search engine in the world. So
I have heard that. Yeah.
it's also, only after Google. I don't know how maybe Google has fallen so far, but I think YouTube in itself is a great way to get your content found, right? If somebody's looking for something. So that's why I would recommend it. We can go into the whole, like, do you just put up the audio and just put a static picture on there, whatever. From what I've read and heard from people is, it's better to just have the video. Don't even edit it or cut it. Just record the screen or whatever you're using and just put it up there in the beginning, and you can maybe work on editing later. But my perfectionism, as much as I've tried to beat it down, has stopped me at the video part. And I don't know why.
That's all right. I think we all have our pitfalls, really. There's some things that it's not our strength, and so we just kind of delay it,
Mm-hmm.
We don't go for it. I syndicate my audio episodes to YouTube with a static image. Is that what you said you do too?
No, so I don't do that. So that's the easiest way of doing it. There's actually, yeah. So YouTube is pushing their podcasting. If you want to get into it right now, this is like for the nerdy people. I'm a nerd, so not said derogatorily.
With pride. You're a nerd with pride.
Yeah. YouTube is really pushing their podcasting feature. So I would definitely recommend, if you're starting one, explore it a little bit. Just explore it because they're really pushing podcasts. That's my 2 cents. I don't even take my own advice. So do as I say, not as I do.
That's all right. I think just talking about it helps people to understand, like, you had that intention, but you didn't follow through with it. And maybe someday you will. But anyways, people can see what you're putting out there and learn from it. So there's no right or wrong way. It just is what it is.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your audience now. Do you know much about your audience? You said that you had gotten some people contacting you with about your newsletter. How about your podcast? Does anybody contact you about your podcast?
Yeah, no. So people, I think, yeah, I have people, mostly good things, right? I don't think I've ever had a negative interaction with anyone. Yeah, I get some messages based, depending on the episode. Like I'll get a couple of messages. Hey, that was really awesome. How did you find this person? Great topic, all that stuff. And then I do have people reach out to me to be guests on the podcast as well, which is insane to me because that to me is crazy that people are reaching out to me to be guests. Still boggles my mind. But yeah, in terms of my audience, it's pretty varied. I have like people from like C-suite all the way down to students, everything in the middle, and it runs the gambit of. The two main specialties, if you want to call it, that I straddle is clinical work, right? The clinical people. So there's a lot of clinical people. I'm a pharmacist, so naturally speaking, I have a lot of pharmacists in my audience, and then also with the technology side. So I have a good amount of people in the tech side as well. And obviously there's overlap, right? There's there are technical clinician people in there. But in terms of like the roles and responsibilities, it runs kind of the gambit of, from like C-suite all the way down to students. Guess is usually, I don't have students on my podcast. Maybe one day I will, just to ask them like, whatever.
I've only
But
done it once, I think.
yeah, not to go on a tangent, but I think I've learned a lot from students. There's been a lot of things that I've learned from them. And I mean, I wouldn't be here talking to you if it wasn't for a student, actually. So I try to get people in, I don't know if I look for a specific specialty. I mean, there's a specific role. I reach out to a lot of people. I do a lot of cold outreach, just reaching out to cool people, individuals that I find fascinating or are doing cool things. And I'll set up like a 30-minute call with them. And then during that call, I'll see like how the vibe is. And if it's good, then I'll ask them if they want to be a guest on the podcast. So I really don't look at somebody's like, title or whatever. There are some times where I try to reach out to specific things because I don't have, like, for example, like recently I've been trying to do a better effort of getting investors on, like, VCs, angels, people like in that sphere, mainly because I think that that's a world for me, like, again, going back to that I don't understand that well. And also a lot of people in the space don't really understand. Right. So like, I'll go out and try to find like people in a space, right? Like if I don't have one, like, I also try to do the same thing with like women's health. Like I wanted to find women's health startups and really talk about them and, try to find things like that. Because I noticed like, hey, I've talked about a lot of things. I haven't talked to a lot of investing things, and I haven't talked about a lot of women's health stuff. So like if I see a trend, like, I haven't touched on it, then I'll try to reach out to people in that niche or, thing. But overall, I just kind of, my philosophy is if you have a cool person and a good conversation, most people will enjoy it.
Right. Back to your audience, I wanted to know, what do you want them to do with the information from your podcast episodes once they hear it?
I think for me is I want people to just learn something new, hopefully, or validate something that they already know. I mean, you can do both, right? And I want people to, I think the biggest thing I want people to know is, especially specifically for my audience, because we're in healthcare, I think in healthcare, there's a lot of, oh man, it's never going to change. No one's helping us. I mean, obviously I started this during COVID, right? Like all this was happening in the background. I mean, I was also part of that downward spiral, like, oh, no one's, we're on our own. And I think the one thing I want people to get out of it is there's hope. Like there's a lot of people out there trying to take on a lot of difficult topics. And the biggest thing for me is, I think I said in my intro, like, I want to talk to different people, like from founders all the way to clinicians, to build a better healthcare system. And I truly mean that. Like, I think that the more people we get, the more voices we hear from different perspectives, if we can distill that all together, I think you find that everyone is looking for the same thing. You had mentioned interoperability. That's something that I talk about a lot ad nauseum sometimes. I think there is some importance to hearing other people talking about the same problem that you're having, that you're not alone, and also you're not the only one solving them. So one thing I learned during my time was it's funny that clinicians are looking for help, and also the tech people are also looking for help, in the sense that they're looking for clinicians to help them and vice versa. And through this whole process, the reason why I wanted to build that bridge between the clinical side and the tech side was both sides are not scared. Scared is not a good word, but they just don't know how to reach each other. Like they don't know how to talk to each other. They don't know, like, both sides are afraid of rejection, And I think that's the one thing I'm trying to get across is these people aren't scary from either side, and both sides are looking to solve the same problem. So why don't we just work together, and that way we can solve the problem faster? I don't know if that actually answers your question, but that's like the theme and the goal of my podcast is to get that message across.
I appreciate that. I feel like you just kind of explained what the reason for some of the guests to be on your show is, but also I think for the audience, you're helping them to understand something that they may not have known or validate something that they already knew.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, there you go. I think that there needs to be a why, why you start the podcast, what's in it for the audience, what do they need to hear from you, what do you need to learn from your guest? I think there can be a lot of different things that come out of a podcast, but if we don't talk about it, it doesn't get other people's creative juices flowing and inspire them. So thank you for going down these rabbit holes with me, Zan.
Of course, of course.
Now, I do have a few more questions. Do you happen to have more time?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Okay. What's in it for you?
No one might believe me or anything like that. Honestly, I started this to just because I was interested. I wanted to make a career transition, right? Like I wanted to kind of do that. And that's why I was creating the content. But when the podcast was really just started to just mainly for learning for myself, because I think when you're thinking in a vacuum, you can get lost in your own echo chamber, for better or for worse. The podcast I just started because I just I enjoyed talking to people, and the conversations I was having were so amazing. And I just wanted to put that out there. And that was why I started it. Now, maybe one day, in a perfect world, if I could make content my thing, like where I get paid for it, if people want to pay me for it, that would be cool. Maybe that's the next step that I'm trying to get to. Maybe that's what's in it for me. But right now it's just more so I enjoy doing it. And I think that when I started my newsletter and podcast, I said, hey, I'm going to give this a good try for, not just like a couple of months or whatever. I said, hey, I'm going to give myself like a 3 to 5 year horizon, see where I end up there. And then after that, let's see. And then the whole time I told myself, like, if I'm not enjoying it, I'm just going to stop it. Like, and I'm very blessed to have a good job. I don't need anything else. I'm doing this in my spare time. So, I do want to acknowledge that I'm in a very privileged position that not everyone can be in. It started off as just like a cool thing to do to distill this, to give this information away to people. But now maybe it'll morph into something more like professional. I don't know yet. That's an internal dialogue I'm having with myself currently. Where do I want to go next? Is there more, or is this it?
That answers the question. I appreciate you diving into that because until somebody asks you that question, kind of like that student asked you that question, like, is this what you're going to do for the rest of your life? Sometimes we don't think about things until people ask the question.
100%.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you one of the tougher questions I think I've ever asked anybody in this series. I understand that you have a 1-year-old.
Mm-hmm.
So, how has having a baby changed podcasting for you?
Ooh, it slowed down a lot. When he was born, there was a lot around his. Thankfully, the mother and he's all right. My wife is okay. But I took like a month or two off, just to kind of enjoy him. I recently took like another month off recently. So I'm not as consistent as I used to be, and I think that's kind of like where, like I said, that internal dialogue is happening. So that's been like the biggest thing. I'm not blaming him or anything. I will more than happily, trade this for, spend time with him rather than, do like the podcasting thing or edit it on a computer. So the biggest change has just been like my consistency. Before I used to be weekly for a very long time. And now I've kind of moved back to bi-weekly to see like if that's more of a sustainable thing. And see if maybe I can go back to weekly because I'd like to go back to weekly, but yeah, it's slowed me down quite a bit substantially, but I'm okay with it. It's still, I would happily do that, and that's not a trade-off for me at all.
Thank you for being vulnerable and answering honestly, because I think a lot of people out there who are not parents yet don't know how hard it is to be a parent and to kind of claim that time for yourself. I know you like to have conversations, but as much as you like to do that, family comes first.
100%, yeah. And I think that's the one thing I wanted to do. Was like I just wanted, especially like when my son was born, I was just like, I want to spend as much time with him before he starts hating me. It's just everything goes. We were talking about it before we were recording. It's like they just grew up so fast. He's a year old already, and I can't believe where that time went. He's got his teeth coming in. He's crawling around, screaming at us, and laughing and crying and all that stuff. And honestly, I wouldn't trade any of it for the world. All the sleepless nights, everything. It's probably the greatest thing I've ever done. I'm not even that good at it, but but it's been the most amazing experience in my life.
What advice do you have for pharmacist podcasters who are new dads?
Don't be too hard on yourself. I think that's one thing that I have to tell myself constantly is don't be too hard on yourself. Family comes first. And one thing you'll know is no one is going to ever get mad at you for putting your children in front of a hobby or, I mean, if it's your business, it's a little different, but if you're just doing it on the side, no one's going to get mad at you for taking care of your family. And I think that's something that I had to force myself to learn and talk to my guests, be like, hey, I'm really sorry. This is taking a long time. And everyone's like, dude, why are you even apologizing? Like, do whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. So I would say don't be too hard on yourself. Take care of your business first, and fit this into your life. Don't fit your life into this, if that makes sense.
Ooh, that was a good one, Zan. Really good. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, as we start to wrap this up, I wanted to ask, what's the best way for my audience to find your podcast?
It's pretty much everywhere. Apple Podcast, Spotify. I think Amazon. I think it's on there. Simplecast, whatever you use, whatever podcasting app you use. If you type in Digital Thoughts Podcast, you'll find it. It's a big yellow box with a red square on it. And so yeah.
When I first saw that, I was like, it looks like the Swiss flag, except with a yellow background, right?
Yeah.
A little bit?
Yeah. So yeah, the reason why I chose those specific colors, because I remember you asked me, like, did you choose those colors on purpose? I did actually, because so I really love branding and marketing and kind of those kind of avenues. And one of the things is you need to catch people's attention, because on a screen, and sorry if you don't want, no one wants to hear this, but on a screen, you just have like an inch real estate, right? Or less than that even. And you need people to stop or pay attention to something. So bright yellow is a color that's not used all the time. And it's very like in your face. So that's why I chose that color.
Gotcha. Well, and then you have kind of the plus sign or,
Mhm.
the Swiss cross. I don't know what you want to call it. And that can be a sign of health.
Yeah.
It's like a symbol that we use
Exactly.
in
Yeah.
healthcare. So, yeah, I don't disagree with it at all. But I think, last time we talked, which was probably about a year ago, I was like, yellow, it's so yellow.
Yeah. And that's by
It's very eye
design.
catching.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing the reason behind the choice. That's interesting. Now, do you have a central website where you could send my audience to find your podcast, or is it just on the podcast players?
The best way to find the podcast is just going on your podcasting app and just typing in Digital Thoughts Podcast. If
That's
you're
fair.
interested, you can subscribe to the Substack, which is zainsyed.substack.com. And that also links to my link. I usually post about my podcast on there and links to the podcast episodes with a little blurb on what it's about and about the guests a little bit.
Yeah, and you post your Substack newsletter on LinkedIn as well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, LinkedIn. You connect with me on LinkedIn. Send me a message. If I don't respond to you, do not be afraid to follow up. That's another thing. Network and follow up. Those two things will get you really far in the game.
Being persistent. That's what I call it. Absolutely. Now, Zan, there are many people out there who want to start a podcast. What advice do you have for new podcasters?
To start, I think the most important thing is it's an audio format. So make sure I think the only thing that I would obsess over is how you sound. Just get a cheap mic. Both you and I use the same mic. That's a great mic to use. Blue Yetis, they're pretty cheap. You can get something for really good, like $50 to $80. Just grab one of those and then start there. I think the only thing I would really obsess over is how you sound. And once you go from there, just hit record and just go for it.
Good advice. Yes. When we were talking before we pressed record, we were talking about how we both have a Samson Q2U. And I just wanted to clarify, we are not using Blue Yetis. I actually am kind of against the Blue Yeti, to be perfectly honest, Zan. I did not have a good experience with it. No, it just didn't sound good with my recording space and my voice and the dials that I chose to turn. So I don't like it.
This is actually the only mic I've ever used. I've never used the Blue Yeti. I've had some friends that used it and it sounded fine for them, but yeah, definitely the Samson,
Samson, SAMSON, and then the letter Q, the number 2, and then the letter U.
Yeah,
Samson
definitely. I think it's like
Q2U.
$80 to $90 on Amazon. Sometimes you'll find right now. in December, November, I think when this goes out in like December, it might be on sale. So definitely pick it up. It's worth it.
Awesome. You know, I really need to create an Amazon store. You know what I mean? And because all the time I'm recommending stuff. Do you have an Amazon store yet?
No, I don't. I should. I mean, yeah. I mean, you should start it now. Start it for this
Totally.
for this episode.
I should. I should. I was just doing a YouTube video. Sorry, this is a little sidebar conversation, but I was just doing a YouTube video back in October, I believe it was. And as I was doing it, I'm like, you know, I'll put the description in a banner below, but I don't have an Amazon store, so I'll show it to you, but I don't have a link. I know it's kind of a letdown, I think, for the person watching. But anyways, you can check out my YouTube channel. There is a video there.
Nice.
All right. As we start to wrap this up, Zan, is there anything that you have to promote coming up here in 2025 or anything else you'd like to share?
No, nothing really. Just the Substack. Like I said, Digital Thoughts podcast, Digital Thoughts newsletter. Just subscribe. I will say it's been a little sparse recently, but I'm hoping in 2025 to get back more to it. Everyone says I have really interesting things coming up or whatever. I hope I do have interesting things coming up and some interesting conversations that I want to have with myself and others. So that's the only thing I need to promote. Nothing really else. If you want to reach out to me, please don't hesitate to reach out to me via LinkedIn, whatever. Happy to help anyone out. Right. I mean, I tell people, it took the whole world to get me to this point, literally talking to people all around the globe to get to this point, the 3.5-year journey. Any way I can pay it forward, I'd love to, because I had literally hundreds of people help me to get to this point. So if I can be part of those hundreds of people for you, I'd be happy to do that.
I love that sentiment. Thank you very much for paying it forward. That's wonderful. And this is going to come out December 27th, 2024. So, Zan, Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. Happy New Year to you as well.
Thank you very much. And thank you for being on the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Take care.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks again to Dr. Zain Syed for being my guest today on the Pharmacist Voice podcast, episode 310. I'll do just a quick recap and then I'll wrap this episode up. First of all, Zan had a lot to say, and I really appreciated all those different angles that our conversation had. He covered why he started his podcast, Digital Thoughts Podcast, who his audience is, the variety of guests that he interviews, what they talk about, why he picked that interview style for his show, what the audience gets out of listening, and some advice there at the end. Advice for new podcasters and advice for new dad podcasters, which is kind of a unique point of view. Not every pharmacist podcaster that I interview is a parent. Next, I want to say that my one regret from this interview is that we didn't talk more about interoperability. I know this episode was about podcasting, Digital Thoughts Podcast, and Zan as the host, but I kind of wanted to follow up about interoperability. So I might have to have Zan back to talk about interoperability on this show. It's a great topic. Now, in my own words, I'm no expert, but interoperability in healthcare will allow providers, including pharmacists like us, to access patient information right away, regardless of which computer system is being used. So if you are in retail pharmacy, for example, this means no more flying blind if you're filling a one-time prescription for an out-of-town patient who can't remember what they're taking. Now, as a pharmacist who's been licensed since 2001, that has happened more times than I care to remember. You do the best you can with the information you have, and you do what's in the best interest of the patient. You take it one patient at a time, but boy, interoperability in healthcare with the information being accessible right away would be so helpful, right? All right, now that I have that regret out of the way, I will recap a different topic. If you are looking for a beginner microphone that sounds great, you need to consider the Samson Q2U microphone. That's SAMSON, Samson, the letter Q, the number 2, and the letter U. Samson Q2U microphone. Zan and I both used one for this interview that you heard today, and I'm using one right now to do this review and wrap up. And my last comment today is that I respect new parents like Zan who continue to host a podcast. Zan started his podcast back in December of 2022. He's published 83 episodes in 2 years, during which time he became a new dad. There are plenty of pharmacist podcasters out there with children and small children, but I just want to take a second to say that I respect that Zan is a new parent and he's still podcasting. Thank you, Zan, for sharing your story about being a pharmacist dad podcaster. I think that makes you a role model for other pharmacist podcasters with young children. Thank you. All right, last comment of the day. People want to hear Zan's digital thoughts, and he likes podcasting. So I think we'll be hearing more from Zan in 2025. Again, he has published 83 episodes in 2 years, and from what I can tell, there's no end in sight. Keep up the good work, Zan. And that ends my recap. Thank you for listening to episode 310 of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. Go to thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. In the show notes, you'll find a link to Digital Thoughts podcast and Zan's newsletter, a link to Zain Syed PharmD on LinkedIn, the Samson Q2U microphone, a link to my online store, just in case you're interested in podcasting as well. You'll also find my social media links and more. Everything you need is on thepharmacistvoice.com. If you know someone who might like to learn about Digital Thoughts podcast or might be a good guest for Zan, please share this episode with them. And if you like this podcast, please subscribe to or follow the Pharmacist's Voice podcast on your favorite podcast player and YouTube to get each new episode right when it comes out. Thank you for listening today. Happy New Year, and I'll talk to you next week in 2025.